Good. Thank you for inviting me up to Scotland. It's a great pleasure to be here. I don't think I've been to Scotland for 20 years, so that's way too long, isn't it? So it is a real pleasure. I had a wonderful day in Edinburgh yesterday, looking around the National Museum of Scotland and the National Gallery and doing some talks for the Christian Union there. And it was wonderful to see that city. I'm not going to see Glasgow other than the station, but I'm sure it's got equal treasures in it too. The talk that I'm going to give is called Integrating Fact and Meaning, and I think probably as was prayed, it is going to be a little bit expanding, perhaps mentally expanding for some of us. So stay with me, I hope. L'Abri, in a sense, we don't try to dumb things down, but we try to help people, in a sense, enlarge their understanding, their vision of reality, of the reality that God's put us in. But if you want to ask questions as we go along, anything for clarification, then do just put up your hand and ask. And then what we'll do at the end is we'll have a discussion time after the lecture. The lecture's about 45 minutes long. And then we'll have a discussion time and we'll have some time to take questions. But if you feel that there's something you need clarified as I go along, then do stop me. The subject that I was thinking about today, it really started with a lunch conversation. And one of the things we do at L'Abri is we sit down with the students most lunchtimes and we say, have you got something you'd like to ask, a question? And someone at this lunch table asked a question that probably gets asked every term at one of our lunch tables, is about how does kind of predestination and free will fit together, and God's providence, His guiding of things. And when people ask those kind of questions, I often like to ask them, well, what do you mean by this or mean by that? Because sometimes we use words without really understanding the meaning, or maybe my meaning is different from yours. So I asked a girl, she mentioned the providence of God. She was from the southern United States. And I said to her, well, what do you mean by the providence of God? Whereupon she said this to me. She said, the providence of God is this: God's works of providence are His most holy, wise and powerful preserving and governing of all creatures, ordering them and all their actions to His own glory. Which was, I thought that was quite impressive, wasn't it? Does anybody know where that comes from? Where is that from? Sorry? Yes, that's the Westminster Confession, and she got it word perfectly, exactly right. So I then said to her, what does that mean? And she looked at me like this for about 3 seconds, very intently, and then she said, I have no idea. But she'd been through, as a good Presbyterian, been through many catechism classes and learning the Westminster Confession, and she knew virtually the whole Westminster Confession by heart. But it's, as to what it meant and what it meant for her life, it was an almost total blank. It's the same kind of problem that I think we hit up against with Christians. If we ask them about the Trinity, for example, if I asked you, can you give me a definition of the Trinity, or what is the Trinity? Most people would be able to have some stab, it's Father, Son and Holy Spirit, 3 persons, one nature, one substance, or something like that, whatever it is. But then if I said to you, well, what is the meaning of the Trinity for the way you see life and what life is about, and the way we see reality and the way that we live, most people can't even begin to answer the question. They know the fact of something, but they don't really understand the meaning, if you like, the implications for what it is. I came across a fascinating article in the Sunday Times, I think written by Brian Appleyard a few months ago, entitled Stupid. And it was about Google. And it was a fascinating article based on a book that someone had written on the kind of one of the effects of the information age on us. But in this information age, we can gather all kinds of information at the touch of a button, and we have access to unprecedented knowledge before. But the question in the article is, well, how come we don't seem to be getting any wiser? And this, I like what he's written here in this stupid, it's talking about the average kind of person using Google and such search engines. He Googles his way through life, scanning and skimming, not pausing to think or to absorb. He feels himself being hollowed out by the replacement of complex inner density with a new kind of self, a self that's evolving under the pressure of information overload and the technology of the instantly available. It's interesting, isn't it, how we've got that information overload where we could get, through news channels, 24-hour news, internet, we're bombarded with information. But one of the things it's doing to us is making our lives, in a sense, very shallow. We're always, the article is about how our attention, we're often doing 3 things at once, aren't you? You're walking down the road, but you're on your mobile phone. I don't know if they do this in Scotland, do they? They do it, yeah. In England, everyone does, Or you're chatting with a friend, or you're on the computer. I watch people on the train on the way up. One guy had 2 mobile phones and his computer. And the whole of reality becomes a kind of skimming with multiple inputs. But we never really absorb things and the depth of making connections between things. And many people that come to L'Abri, I think come because they feel a loss of reality, really, that something is missing from life, and life has become very shallow and kind of superficial. And I would say that counts with Christians as well. In a sense, their faith and their experience of Christian life is very shallow, almost like it's become 2-dimensional. Rather than a 3-dimensional reality, it's become 2-dimensional. And the question that started me off is, what is missing? What is missing here? I think it's reality that is missing. That's what a lot of people come saying. I just don't feel that life is very real anymore. It has no depth. It's become shallow. And reality, in a sense, reality isn't missing, because I think it's still there, but we are missing reality. Do you understand the way? It's still there. The world, in a sense, is still the same. You look at these beautiful forests and hills and things and people that are around here. They're the same as they were 200 or 300 years ago. But it's like we're missing an aspect of reality. Hans Rookmaaker, who worked at the Dutch L'Abri and was an art historian, professor of art history, said this: reality is there, but reality is not just there. We have to recognize it, perceive it, and enter into it. We have to recognize it, perceive it, and enter into it. And what I think is that most of the time we're living in a very reduced reality, something that's very fragmented, and we're not really entering into the depth of what's there. So that's what I want to do in this lecture, is explore reality and what makes up reality. What is reality? Yeah, it's a big topic, isn't it? Big title, but we'll have a go at it. What makes up reality? I want to show you some pictures now and just get a little bit of discussion and kind of feedback of these pictures, because it might help us see what reality is. If you look at this first picture here, and I'd like you to just give me some answers to this. I want to first ask you, what do you see in the picture? What do you see? Okay, American flag burning. Yeah, American flag burning. Maybe people running away in the back. Yeah. Okay, anything else? Flags burning maybe on top of something. Yeah, it's kind of over something. What do you think is happening here? What do you think is happening in this picture?
Some sort of protest.
Some kind of protest. Yeah. Okay, let me show you another picture. Okay, what do you see in this picture? People burning an American flag. Okay, good. So the same thing. Yeah. What else do you see in the picture?
A statement about political things.
Yes, a statement about, yeah, political things, maybe American imperialism or something like that. Yeah. What else do you see? Blue sky. There's people. What do the people look like? They look...
Not American.
Not American, yeah, yeah, yeah. They look Middle Eastern, don't they, probably? And if you look carefully, I'm sorry, some of you are far away, but there's another flag in the background, which I think looks like, I think, an Iraqi flag. Okay, let me do the last one. What do you see? What do you see? Veterans, okay. Yeah. Burning an American flag, doing the same thing, aren't they? Anyway. They could be protesting as well. Yeah, yeah, they could be. What do you think's happening? What do you think's happening? You said that maybe they're protesting. What do other people think?
One of them has another. Is it a flag?
The black flag. Yep, yep. He's holding a black flag. Yep. If you can get up close enough, it has the word "forgotten" on it that you can see. Okay, we'll go. Sorry, anybody?
Could be American people.
Could be American. Yeah, yeah. They look American. They don't look Middle Eastern like the other people. Yeah.
If you're getting rid of American flags, they burn them.
Yes, yeah, yeah. If you're getting decommissioning, this is actually a flag decommissioning ceremony, where they burn flags that have become soiled and no longer would be suitable for military use, and it's a dignified flag burning ceremony. I show you those pictures. It's interesting because the first picture here is actually from a close-up from that last picture of the flag decommissioning ceremony. But it's an interesting thing because I first of all asked you, what do you see? And it was fascinating how immediately you started telling me about things that you didn't see in the picture, but they were things, meanings that you took from the picture. Because if I ask you what you see, you would say, I see some blue cloth which has stars on it and some red and white stripes. But the fact you first said to me it's an American flag, and an American flag is a meaning, isn't it, taken from the facts. Do you see what I mean? The facts are it's cloth, it's got 50 stars, it's got 13 red and white stripes. But the fact, we call that an American flag, but that's a meaning taken from the facts put together. And then, but also, people also jump to other meaning, it's protest. And it's interesting that, in a sense, in these two, or if you go to these two pictures, the same, in a sense, facts are happening. As someone said very clearly, an American flag is burning, but the meaning of the two events is quite different, isn't it? And you can obviously get some clues as to the meaning from the facts. You can see in this one, you know, they're Middle Eastern-looking people. They've got their own national flag there. They're burning an American flag. Here, in this picture, they are, as you said, someone immediately said veterans. Obviously, it's a dignified, the whole ceremony, the way they're standing. They're a certain generation. They look American. They could well be Vietnam or even World War II veterans, the older man. So it's fascinating because if I ask you the question then, what is the reality of what's happening in these photographs? You would have to say, I think, that reality is made up of the facts and the meaning that is taken from those facts. If you just had the fact on their own, an American flag is burning, you wouldn't have reality of the event, would you? The reality of the event has to include, if we're going to describe it in a bigger way, the same fact, you know, the same flag with the blue and the stars and the red and white is burning in both, but the meaning is different, and the reality of what's happening is affected by the meaning. Is that communicating? Yeah, good. Getting the idea. Okay, thanks. So what is a fact? Let's think of what is a fact. This is just a kind of dictionary definition. It's not particularly good, but it's not particularly bad either. A fact is a thing known to have occurred, to exist, or be true. A fact might be, you know, that your jumper is blue. That would be, your jersey is blue. That would be a fact, unless we were colourblind. Edinburgh is in Scotland. You know, that's a fact. Water is H2O or something like that. It has an objectivity to it. Although people obviously can discuss the facts, can't they, very much. And I like using this, a fact, as a kind of, in a sense, like just a single occurrence of something. You know, it's just a thing on its own. That's what a fact is. Now, I don't want to confuse you here, but I just want to make the point that, in a sense, a fact or a single point or a single occurrence of something has no meaning in itself. If I give you a word, which you, like a word, let's say that word is a kind of single fact or an occurrence of something. If I give you a word which you can make no connections between what the word is and other things you know, it doesn't have any meaning for you. Let me give you the word blatjang. Does anyone know what blatjang is? No? Someone does. One person does.
It's dried fruit which is used in Chinese.
In Chinese cooking? Yeah, well, almost, yeah. Blatjang is Afrikaans for chutney. But you see, you don't know any Afrikaans, and the sound of blatjang has no connections for you. It's not like if I said a word bang, you know, that at least has a sound connection for you. But do you see the fact, if it's on its own and you can't make any connections between anything else, it has no meaning. Does that make sense to you? Can you see that? Something on its own has no meaning. So what is meaning? Well, meaning, I think, is the connection between the facts. This is what meaning is. Meaning is what connects the facts together. For example, when we see a flag, the facts, if it's got a blue background, 50 stars, 13 red and white stripes, we connect those things together to give the meaning American flag. Do you see? Does that make sense for you? Yeah. The meaning is the connections between things. If we connect the meanings in that picture, which we began to do very quickly, you know, the flag is burning, they look Middle Eastern. They've got another flag, which is the Iraqi flag there. Well, you know, the meaning is they're probably protesting against American imperialism. Do you see that? The other one, we saw the facts, you know, they're older men, it's dignified, they're wearing some kind of military uniform. These are the facts. You know, they're old enough to be World War II veteran or Vietnam veteran. They're burning a flag. Well, maybe it's not protest against America. Perhaps it's, as you said, you know, a dignified decommissioning ceremony. So does that make sense for you? And we're doing that all the time, in a sense. Reality is made up of the facts and the meanings, and the meanings is the connection between the facts. So I think, like, this is how I see of reality. These are all the facts, and we make connections between them. And, whoops, sorry, let's go back one. The connections, in a sense, make a 4D, I call it a 4D matrix of reality that we live in, because it also has a time dimension to it. That as you live and experience more things, the meaning of things deepens for you. You've probably had that with a biblical text, haven't you? You know, you read a Bible text 20 years ago, and you thought about it, but over the 20 years, probably the meaning of it has deepened, hasn't it? And changed and grown for you as you've experienced things. I mean, maybe, you know, a life event happened to you. You lost a loved one, and a Bible text that didn't really mean very much suddenly means something very important to you, you know, and it becomes much more real. So our kind of reality, like, it grows and deepens in this way. So it's important to point out that meaning is objective and subjective. For example, the American flag, it's an objective meaning, isn't it? That this thing, the blue background, the 50 stars, is an American flag. That's accepted as objectively true. But the meaning of an event can also have a subjective element, which means, you know, how do I relate to those facts? For example, if you were Palestinian, you might feel differently about the picture of the protest than if you were American. Do you see? You'd have a different... And that's part of reality, isn't it? We all relate to the facts differently depending on our subjectivity. So, and that doesn't make it a bad thing. I think it makes it a good thing. But meanings can also be true or false. You can make real connections between things or wrong ones. If I said a blue background, 50 stars, red and white stripes is the flag of Romania, you know, I would be making a false connection. And so it's interesting because we don't have to, just because it's subjective doesn't mean it becomes totally relativistic. There is also true and false. It is truly the flag of America, it's not the flag of Romania. And it's an essential part of reality, meaning is an essential part of reality because, as I said, if you were to just describe the facts in those pictures, you couldn't say very much. The meaning is an essential part of describing what's happening in that photograph. Okay. Now, finding meaning and working at meaning, it requires several things, and I want to think about this matrix of fact and meaning. It involves, first of all, it involves looking carefully. And I must say that well, maybe you were too shy as an audience, but some of you probably need to look more carefully at things. And going around the National Gallery, you know, it's amazing when you start. I was watching other people looking at pictures, and you know, you know what people do, and they read the thing first, and they spend maybe 30 seconds reading it. Then they look at the picture for 5 seconds, and then they go. And you know, but we're not very good at actually stopping and really looking at things. I think that's part of our kind of rushing information technology overloaded age. And when you start looking at things, you start seeing all kinds of interesting things that are in pictures, and you know, and so we need to look carefully. It requires knowledge. Most of you knew, probably all of you knew, that was the American flag, but if you'd never, you know, learnt your flags at school or wherever, you wouldn't know. You know, my kids love learning the flags of the world, and they have puzzles and things, and they love that kind of thing. But if they'd never done that, they didn't have that knowledge, you wouldn't know what flag it was. So it requires knowledge. It requires reason. You know, we reason about what's in the picture and how it links to other things, but sometimes imagination as well. Someone said, you know, maybe those older men burning the flag are veterans. In a sense, that was a kind of, you know, an imaginative leap. But it was probably a right one. I think definitely a right one. I'll tell you why in a minute. It requires revelation. I had an interesting, it requires knowledge that we don't know being revealed to us. Once when I showed those pictures, someone in the audience who was American said that flag, do you remember the black flag that said forgotten on it? That is a prisoner of war flag. It says not forgotten, and that was the flag that prisoners of war would make when they were captured and put up in their own, you know, their own compound where they were imprisoned. Not forgotten. And that was something, knowledge that someone revealed to me. I didn't know that. You know, it wasn't in my reality, but they explained it to me, and then I could see it. Then we discover, I think as we work at reality, we discover meaning that is there. I think as a Christian, I think this is very important, that I'm not creating the meaning of the photograph, but I'm discovering the meaning that is there. Do you see? There's a difference between that. I'm not just arbitrarily making up a meaning. I'm trying to work at what the meaning that is there. I'll come back to that. And then lastly, it expands with time. I've said that already. So that you might come back to the same Bible verse or the same book, or maybe you'll go to the National Gallery in Edinburgh and look at the same painting that you looked at before, but you know, something might have changed. You might have read a biography of Rembrandt, and now as you stand before the wonderful self-portrait Rembrandt as an old man, you know, you look at it in a new way because you know something of his life, and the meaning of that and the reality of the picture deepens for you. Okay. Now, I think people lived in this 4D matrix of reality up to quite recent times. And I'm just going to use this picture to illustrate it. I've lost the name of the artist, but it's a kind of late medieval painting of the Last Supper. And it probably doesn't, yeah, I don't know if you can see it, but it's interesting that all over the leaves at the back of the photograph and the bushes at the back, there are butterflies. And at one level, if you're a modern, you could think, well, he just decided to put butterflies, they're nice things, let's, paint a few butterflies, or maybe he just learned how to draw butterflies and things. Oh, okay, I'll put a few. But the butterfly's in there because the butterfly has a meaning in it, which a medieval person would have seen and would have understood as part of the butterfly. Does anyone know what the meaning of the butterfly is? I saw it actually in the National Gallery. I saw another painting where there was a picture of, I can't remember what it was, somebody, a deathbed scene, and then it had a vase with a flower and a butterfly on it in the foreground. Does anyone know what butterfly is? The resurrection, yeah. The butterfly is, the meaning of the butterfly for a medieval mind and would be resurrection, because obviously it dies, in a sense it goes into a cocoon, then it comes out more glorious than it was before. And for the modern mind, we would say, oh, well, it just happens, like that. It just happens to kind of be, that it's slightly like, the idea of resurrection. But for the medieval person, this would be part of their reality. They would say, part of the meaning of the butterfly is resurrection. That is why the butterfly, part of why it is there in reality, part of why it exists. And behind that they would see, the Creator God who's put everything there to speak, in a sense, of his story, of reality, the gospel story. And this is another example. I came across this in Chartres Cathedral. Sorry, these are my own not brilliant photographs. It's quite confusing when you see it, and you might think, oh, here's kind of syncretistic pagan medieval religion. But what it has is the signs of the zodiac in each of these little round, I'll show you a close-up, here you go, in each of these round stained glass windows. You can see the crab, can't you? Cancer, crab, and in the middle, Leo. Can you see the lion in the middle one? Yeah, so they're illustrating the signs of the zodiac. And then what's also in the picture, I don't know if you can see it, is what the farmer is doing during that sign of the zodiac. And in the medieval mind, they would say, the Lord God made everything, the whole of reality, and it's all there, in a sense, as communicating and meaningful. And part of the meaning of the signs of the zodiac is it helps the farmer know when to sow his crop, when to plough. He ploughs, I think he's ploughing during Leo, he harvests another time, and then he threshes at a certain time. They're not, they're not saying, in a sense, like what modern astrology would be saying, that these control us. But what they would say is these are meaningful things given to us by God to help us know what to do at various seasons, and that's the reality that they would have lived in. I've got a lovely quote from C.S. Lewis, I'll tell you in a minute, that kind of goes with that. Okay. Good. Is everybody with me? Are you okay where we are? Good. Let's go. Now, what I want to say is that about 250 years ago, in what is termed the Enlightenment, there became a new way of seeing reality, and a shift and a change from this reality as being a matrix of fact and meaning to something else. And I think it's this that has reduced our experience of reality and fragmented it and made it very shallow. And yet I think most of us are so used now to seeing things this way that we can't see it any other way. And we have to really struggle hard to see the world in which we live another way. It's almost like if you had a pair of, dark glasses on that you were just wearing all the time, and you kind of knew they were there. You wouldn't realise that things were darker than they were. You'd have to become kind of aware of these glasses and take them off before. And I think that's what I'm trying to do in the lectures, help us be aware of the glasses we're wearing. Now, the split occurred in Europe as something called the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was started, let's say, around 1600s and kind of reached the 1750s onwards kind of reached its, really got going in Europe. And it was a response to many of the religious wars that were going on, the 30 Years' War in Europe, which led to huge kind of political instability. And in the Enlightenment, there was a desire to try and find something that would unify people across boundaries and across religion and across, you know, Catholicism and Protestantism. And it gave birth to, well, the one thing that unifies us as human beings is reason, human reason. And so if we say called pre-modernity, I think people in the pre-modernity would have said the way we know things, we need revelation from God. We use reason, but together with revelation, tradition and, you know, teaching over centuries and is important, and experience. But in the Enlightenment, it became human reason. This is the way that we have knowledge, because the thinking would be we're all rational beings, and therefore we should all think the same way, and therefore if we can discover things using human reason, they should be things that we could all agree upon, and everyone could come to the same viewpoint. Descartes, in his great kind of Enlightenment statement, cogito ergo sum, I'm thinking, therefore I am. Reality starts with my thinking about it, my reason. And I suppose one picture of the Enlightenment, here's Rodin's great The Thinker. He's the person, as Descartes did, he locked himself, to start thinking about reality, Descartes locked himself in his room for several days before he came out with his great statement, you know, I think, therefore I am. So he isolated himself, and it was in his mind that reality begins. No religion, no revelation, no historical or cultural baggage, pure human reason. And pure human reason was there to elucidate the facts of life. That's what pure human reason was there to do. So let me put it this way. Here's the old way of thinking about reality: fact and meaning, objective and subjective, things that hold together, unity and diversity, single, universal ideas and also particulars. But what the Enlightenment wanted to do is, first of all, it created a division between these things. And on the left-hand side, as you look at it, this is what reality is all about. It's all about finding the facts, the objective, the unified things, the universals. And it's the other things, the subjectivity and the diversity, you know, the cultural things, the historical things that are kind of all to do with interpretation and meaning. And this is what happened. This side should shrink away, and in a sense this becomes reality, the objective facts. And I think that's what the Enlightenment, in a sense, became about, searching for the objective facts of reality. And you think of that in many different spheres. You could think about it in say, sociology with Marx, for example, Karl Marx. Let's work out, you know, the facts of how societies work, and his historical kind of look at society, and let's find out, you know, well, it works according to these laws, you know, the supply and demand, and you know, the dialectic, and he would, it's trying to find the facts, and then he could say, and this is how society should progress in this way. So that's an example from kind of social sciences. You could look at some of the psychologies, you know, it's all about finding the facts of human psychology, B.F. Skinner and behaviorism and that kind of thing. And it's interesting that around this time, actually, the word fact changed its meaning. Before about 1600 or so, it came from the Latin factum, which means a thing done. So it means something that really happens in reality and is made a mark on reality. But in 1632 was the first time that a fact now becomes a thing known to be true. Do you see the change? As opposed to something that's done in reality, it becomes something that I know in my head. It makes that move from being something that's really a part of reality to something that starts in my head. And Hans Ruckmark almost says the way that we use fact, the word fact today, he says it doesn't come from a biblical framework of thinking. It actually comes from an Enlightenment framework of thinking, the way we think of what a fact is. Now, I think I don't want to knock science, but I think that because as a doctor, I relied on science, and science is hugely useful, isn't it, to helping us know what things are made of. It's very important to find out the facts of the physical world. Water is H2O, an atom has nucleus and electrons and other things. And science helps us reduce things and break them down and examine them. But what's happened, I think, is science, in a sense, was taken over by this new way of looking things. Remember the person with the binoculars? And it became what I call scientism. And it became an ism, which is a whole view of reality. And Dawkins, I think, is a part of this, Richard Dawkins. And what's happened is that, in a sense, the scientific method for finding out facts has now become a whole view of reality. So that what something is made of is the only thing that it is. Does that make sense to you? What something is made of is the only thing that it is. And that the only thing it is the facts of what it's made of. This is now the only way of looking at the world. And here's a lovely quote from Susan Langer, wrote a book about science. It's probably 20 or more years old now, but I think it's still right. The new way of looking at the world is not the result of science. Rather, science, or what I call scientism, is rather a result of the new way of looking at the world. And the real change is the new way people look at reality. Modern man has this attitude towards the world, the complete submission to what he conceives as hard, cold fact. The exchange fictions, faith, and constructed systems for facts is his supreme value. And I think that's true. What's happened is that the fact now is the only thing that's real. It's the only thing that is a part of our reality. So that Dawkins, for example, it's interesting saying, religion, here's a quote from the God Delusion, one time or another has been thought to fill the four main roles of human life: explanation, exaltation, consolation, and inspiration. In this role, it's now completely superseded by science. So what he's saying is science, which started out as something that could tell us the material facts about what things are made of, has now become a total explanation for human life. And that's, I guess, what you see, isn't it, in Dawkins' kind of worldview. You know, only the facts are admissible in terms of when we think about what's real. I've got a funny cartoon here. I'll let you... Can you read that? Shall I read it? Can you read it, or shall I read it for you? Can you read it? You can read it, can you? Or I'll read it. Okay. The first guy says, some physicists think humanity is close to discovering the theory of everything. This is actual real theory that they're trying to find. So the person says, but couldn't the ability to predict everything undermine the foundation of human society? No one would take chances. We must stop them. And then the first person admits, well, we couldn't actually predict everything with the theory of everything. The theory would only directly describe the fundamental interactions of nature. The world's just too complex to be predicted using that. So the theory of everything title is just a ploy. Yeah, but it sounds good though, doesn't it? That's what he said. And I think that's true, isn't it? It's funny when you see these, this grand total unifying theory, that's going to kind of explain life, the universe, and everything. You see that sometimes, every so often in newspapers, the theory of everything. And but it's not actually a theory of everything, is it? It's a theory of quite limited parts of our reality work. Very fundamental parts, but quite limited. But that's kind of, in a way, like how overinflated science has become. So what happens when we live in a matrix, in a reality of fact alone? Well, I think this kind of happens. The meaning, the connection between things disappears. So that eventually, in a way, what we're left with is a lot of disconnected facts. And many people are like that today. They know lots of facts, but the connections are all missing, and reality becomes very flat. And in a way, we lose ourself in it as well. You know, we lose that subjectivity. When everything's very factual, we lose that subjectivity. You know, this is me, but where am I? I'm just lost in all this information overload. Reality's become very sterile. And our experience of it very disengaged. And so a lot of people describe that my life is a bit like watching TV. You know, I'm watching something, but I'm not really in it. You know, and it's a bit like that. Now, I want to progress along historically a little bit to think about what happened historically after the Enlightenment. You can think of the growing kind of description of everything in terms of facts, of society and human psychology and the natural world. And there was a reaction against it. And this reaction I call romanticism. It was actually a philosophical reaction in Germany, but in the UK it became mainly a reaction amongst the poets and the authors, people like Byron and Shelley and Wordsworth, and I'm sure in Scotland, I'm sure you had very similar. Would you add? I don't know. Would Burns be a? Yeah, he'd be in that camp, wouldn't he? Yeah, yeah. Byron was a Scot. Thank you. Good. Thank you. Yeah. Good. Good. Thank you very much. So that. And what they did is, not surprisingly, because you have wonderful, beautiful scenery here, but nature had been reduced to facts. Water was H2O, leaves were chlorophyll, mountains were geotectonic movements of land masses. But what they did is I'm sure the same happened here in the Highlands of Scotland and beautiful places, in the Lake District in England. Wordsworth and others were there, and they said, no, when I'm in the Lake District, I feel reality become alive again. I feel myself become alive. I'm overawed by the beauty and the wonder of nature. And reality, they said, isn't found in the facts, but it's found in the intensity of my emotional experience as I wander lonely as a cloud, or whatever, as I wander around. Have I got another slide? Yeah. And they once again felt like reality wasn't 2D, just the pure facts of things, but I'm a part of it. But it was through their emotions that they re-entered reality. And this, I think, has been a very strong strand through to the present day, where many people feel my only contact with the real is through intense emotional experience. If you think of the modern fad for bungee jumping, flying off a bridge attached with a little bit of elastic, or extreme sports, or all those kind of things. Somehow it's the intensity of the experience that makes people feel alive and feel like they're connected into reality. And in a way, like what we do, I think, as moderns, is go around collecting intense experiences that we've done, don't we? We're kind of, almost like, well, I've bungee jumped, and now I need to jump out of a helicopter or something or a plane from 60,000 feet with a parachute, hopefully. And then I will, and then things seem alive again. Good. Now, as I come towards the end, I want to ask you an important question, is what happens when faith becomes fact alone, when the Christian faith becomes fact alone? Because I think this is very important for our churches and for the young people and that are in our churches, students and otherwise, who are grappling with these kinds of questions. What happens when faith becomes fact alone, when Christianity becomes fact alone? I think the church, by and large, if you look back at the Enlightenment, the church, by and large, in the UK and Europe and America, I think too, you'd include in the West, accepted the kind of Enlightenment picture that the facts are the only real things. And you see at this time Christians trying to discover the facts about God. Not the the things that we know by faith, but the things that we can say purely by human reason. And you see a whole lot of Christian thinkers, theologians, philosophers kind of saying, you know, these are the things we can say using human reason about God. And that's when the move took place largely from theism to deism, an idea that the deistic God is a kind of is a distant God. You know, we can say, using our human reason, say some things about God. He must exist because we see the creation, and maybe he's like this. He's, you know, he's obviously powerful, and we can say these things, but we can't really say that he enters human history and, you know, etc., because that's the things of faith. But we can say some religious things by fact. And at the also at the time, then we get in liberalism things like the search for the historical Jesus, which is the Jesus of fact, not the Jesus of faith. You know, and then we can go through the Gospels and we can separate out all the things that, you know, could have factually occurred and looked factually real from those that look just kind of added in later, and faith things. And the church has done that in various ways. It accepted the Enlightenment, you know, those binoculars or the sunglasses, as I said. But even in churches that maintained an evangelical theology, I think we've actually also taken on board an Enlightenment worldview. So that in many churches, and I think this is what happened with that girl, in this very good Presbyterian, teaching the Westminster Catechism, a good evangelical church, is that kind of faith and Christian maturity gets boiled down to knowing the facts about Christianity. It gets boiled down to knowing your doctrine well, and that's what makes you a mature Christian. And belief becomes an assent to the facts of doctrine, or a series of propositions. And in many evangelical churches, people know the facts of their faith very well, but they don't have those connections of meaning. Do you see, like, you know, like that girl, she knew providence brilliantly, better than I knew what the idea was of providence, but the meaning was totally missing. And many churches as well that I come across, people are, the students that come to L'Abri, they often don't read their Bibles at all, and I say to them, well, why don't you read your Bible? And they say, well, because I know what it means. I was taught at Sunday school onwards, here's a parable, this is what it means, you know, this is the kind of fact of what it means. And then, so why read the parable again when you know what it means? That's a good question to put out, I think, there, you know. Without getting relativistic about it, I would say that, as I said, a Bible text is part of this 4D matrix of reality, and it's something that we can come back to and deepen our understanding and knowledge of. We might have a go at it later on if I get a chance to. But for many people, they just said, you know, I was taught the meaning of the text, this is what it means, in a sense, the factual, you know, thing of the text, and then, well, I read it again, and, you know, the whole Bible is like that for me. And faith, for many people, has become very cognitive and abstract and disengaged from my reality. And we get a kind of, what I call a loss of spiritual reality. It feels very 2D, you know, my faith. And what do we do? What do you think Christians do when we lose that sense of reality? Lose that kind of the dimension and the meaning, and faith just becomes fact? How do you think we react to it? Let me show you. Yeah, I call it Christian romanticism. And I don't mean that this guy and girl are falling in love in the picture with each other. I mean, I use it in the sense of the Romantic poets. Because you remember what the Romantic poets said, that I engage with reality through the intensity of my emotional experience. And I think that that's what we've done as Christians, as we've made the world more 2D and kind of just, and our faith more factual in a kind of just fact sense. Then many Christians say, well, you know, it's abstract and I know all the doctrines, but there's no reality behind, you know, I can't feel a reality behind it. I know all the things. I know that Christ died for my sins. You know, I know he was raised 3 days later, but it just, no, it doesn't seem to. There's no kind of depth to it. There's no. Then we look for that, in a sense, the meaning and the connection and the participation in reality in other things, and that's I think part of the attraction, in a sense of the emotional feelings that we get from various big praise up things. I don't want to bash those things either, because I don't want to be negative about them. But I think a lot of the time, for many people, that is the only time that God feels real, is in that intense emotional experience, isn't it? Many people, and it actually, I would say it becomes like almost an addictive drug, that you have to go back to that kind of experience in order to feel the reality. I think that's like the Romantic poets. They went and eventually lived in the Lake District because that was the only place they felt reality and like they were a part of something. And I think there's this huge pull for many people today towards that kind of Christianity. Christianity does involve our emotions, but that's only a part of it, isn't it? If it's everything, then it becomes an experience where, in a sense, we have a wonderfully intense emotional experience, but the lights go up, the music goes down, we have to go to work on Monday morning, and it's all gone. It dribbles away. Sometimes it's gone by Monday morning, hasn't it? Maybe it survives till Wednesday, and perhaps by Wednesday we can get to the midweek, praise meeting, and then somehow it doesn't seem to me quite the fullness of what Jesus is talking about when he says, I've come to bring you life in all its fullness. Okay. I think I'll skip. I do have a bit on postmodernity, but I think I'll skip that, because postmodernity, I mean, it's been a very important movement, I've seen in the last 20, 25 years, 30 years. And it's all I wanted really to say briefly on postmodernity is another reaction to the world of facts. But it's a reaction, not a romantic, emotional connection with reality, but it's more just a cynicism and a suspicion of facts. And you see it as well, don't you, in the Christian church. I won't go through those, it's too long. But you see it in the Christian church as well, where, in a sense, there are some churches, you could call that the kind of emerging churches, which are now very suspicious of a faith that is only doctrine, or only, or is very Bible knowledge based. And so they've got rid of doctrine and propositional truth altogether as a kind of reaction against that. And it becomes more about my subjective response to a biblical text. So, and that's a kind of a postmodern movement, a suspicion of the facts, a throwing out of the facts, and everything becomes subjective. And that I think that's happened in many churches, the kind of ones that younger people are attracted to. Very suspicious of doctrine, of organised religion, of proposition, and have thrown that all out. I sometimes, yes. Yeah.
Postmodernism and its cynicism.
Yeah.
Is it now on the way out, and we now have nihilism in its place because that's the only logical outcome for it?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the universities, I would say in terms of teaching, postmodernism has died in most departments. I would say. I have a friend who's a history professor, and I remember she told me, people were writing postmodern doctorate theses, which was about things like my response to Tamagotchis. Do you know what Tamagotchis? Do you remember those little kind of Japanese little things? I mean, you could write a history PhD on that. And she said, now people are just saying, look, come on, let's get real. And, they're really... And I think actually at some kind of level at L'Abri, we're seeing people who have been through postmodernity in a way, or grown up in it. They're in their 20s, so they've kind of grown up in it. And like even 5 years ago, I think people were very cynical about truth and finding reality and ideas. We're seeing, I think, a little bit of a re-emergence of people re-engaging with ideas. And I think there's been some good work that have been done in a number of places showing how, you know, postmodernity has something that's true about it, which is that a lot of people have used the facts in order to, you know, in order to suppress other people, you know, and often we use a claim to know the facts. I mean, I think Dawkins does that in a way, doesn't he? He's a kind of, you know, a postmodern critique of Dawkins would be, you know, he uses the scientific facts to impose his reality on other people. And I think that's often been done. I mean, Marxism, that would be a critique, you know, Marxism said, here's the social facts, everyone needs to bend to them. And it was used as a system of oppression. You know, if you didn't recognize the social facts, because these are the rational facts, if you don't recognize them, you must be irrational and mentally ill. And so they put the dissidents like, you know, Alexander Solzhenitsyn and other people in mental hospitals because, and that was, and postmodernity would say no, you know, but then people recognize that the postmodern critique is valid at one level, but there's, you know, you don't have to go all the way to saying that, well, then we can't know anything about reality. It just means that we need to be a bit more open about it than, you know, than the moderns are, and a bit more sophisticated about the way we think about it. But does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Okay, good. Okay, I have this is my kind of description of postmodernity. It's like where all the facts disappear, and then the connections of, and all we're left is with ourselves in the centre of things. I think that's what kind of postmodernity for me looks like, is the facts disappear, the doctrines, the propositions, and it just becomes about me and how I relate to, well, I'm not quite sure what I relate to anymore, but just it's kind of centred on me. This is a wonderful experiment that they did in on the internet, I think. They got some artists to make dots at random on a piece of paper, and then to number the dots, and then asked children to join the dots. And it was fascinating what children came up with. I'll show you some pictures. Is it going to, hang on. Oh, there we go. Okay. Somebody's got a rock and roll person. Looks like a rock and roll rabbit. I was going to say rock and roll rabbit, but anyway. The Enchanted Garden. A horse. Some geometric patterns and a very reduced reality from somebody. But it's interesting that this is a bit like postmodernity, where kind of all the, in a sense, all the facts are gone and you just have to join everything up however you like. And it tells you probably more about the person, doesn't it, drawing the picture, than it does about reality, about the dots that are there. You know, this person, she likes horses. Alice has been reading The Enchanted Garden recently. That's in her mind. You know, somebody likes rock and roll rabbits, and it's kind of, you know, and this person has quite a reduced, restricted life at the moment. Hopefully they might grow a bit later on. But it's, you know, and that's kind of postmodernity, really. I won't, let's just go on. I'll just let this slide animate. This is postmodern Christianity, really, where we lose all the connections to doctrine and ideas and tradition that's gone before us. You know, it is useful to read what St. Augustine or Calvin or, you know, John Knox said about something in a Bible verse, but instead we throw all that out and we just, you know, we can come up with our new interpretation of something. Okay, I'm going to finish now by talking about reintegrating reality, and this is where I want to end, really. I want to end on a positive note. That has been kind of critique and analysis, and now I want to try and move towards something more positive for us. How do we reintegrate reality? I think we need to integrate it both in the way that we see things and the way that we live. So we can't do one and just do it in the way we see things, but it needs to be the way that we live as well. And I want to think about how we learn to live in an integrated reality. It must include, for me, an integrated reality is objective and subjective. As I said, it includes fact and meaning, unified things and things that are kind of are absolute, and also things that are diverse things and things that are different, because the world to me seems to have all of those in it. And so, incidentally, I would argue, does the Trinity have all these things in it as the source of reality? So let's go back to Rookmarker, where Rookmarker said reality is there, but it's not just there. We have to get to know it, to recognize it, perceive it, and enter into it. And I think what we need to do is, I think the process that we need to be involved in as Christians is this. I call it discovering the relationships of reality that are really there. And not letting reality just be a 2D thing, but it's got to, we extend into that 4D complex. And you could include, I include just looking at the world or reading a Bible text in a similar, as a similar way. And I think this is how we grow. Actually, I think this is how we grow and become more mature as Christians, is as we live more and more in God's reality that He made us to live in, more and more in this 4D matrix of reality. Rookmarker said this about, I like it, it's a definition of the Christian. A Christian is someone who goes into reality. A Christian is someone who goes into reality. In C.S. Lewis's book, The Dawn Treader, one of the Narnia Chronicles, there's an amazing moment where the characters meet a star. I don't know if you know that, on Ramandu's island. Ramandu is actually a star, a kind of decommissioned star or something like that. And Eustace is a boy. Essentially, Eustace is one of the characters that travels from our world to Narnia. But he's a boy who's been brought up in a totally factual world. So he knows all about steam engines and precipitation and rainforests. But when he gets turned into a dragon, he has no idea what he's been turned into, because he's never read any books about dragons and myths and stories. And when he sees the star, he says this. He says this to the star. He says, "In our world, a star is a huge ball of flaming gas." And the star says back to him, "Even in your world, my son, that isn't what a star is, but only what it is made of." Do you see that? He's making that difference. What we've done is we've reduced the reality, so reality is only what something is made of. But C.S. Lewis is saying, no, things are much more than just what they're made of. There's a part of things, the meaning of things, that is a real part and is there. My son, the other day, we were sharing a bath, my 5-year-old, and he suddenly turned to me, he asked a brilliant question. He said, "Daddy, what is water?" And I thought about the way that I could answer. Do you know what my immediate thought was to say, well, water's H2O. It's 2 hydrogen molecules and an oxygen molecule stuck onto it. And then I stopped myself and I thought, well, how can I answer this question in a bigger sense of a bigger reality? And so I said to him, water is life. And he looked at me and he thought about it. Yeah. It is, isn't it? Yeah, water's life. He was very happy with that, But that's describing a much deeper sense of, water is not just what it's made of. What it is much bigger than that. And to say it is life, you die without it. Plants need it to grow. And biblically it really connects, doesn't it? That's the biblical understanding of water as well. It's life. So how can we help expand our reality more and see it? First of all, we actually, maybe it's animated. Yeah, sorry, it's animated the wrong way. First of all, we need to learn to look carefully. That's one of the lessons that we learnt from looking at the flags or from going around the National Gallery. We need to look more carefully in order to really appreciate the reality in which God has put us. The other day I was looking out of our window, must have been in late autumn, in our bedroom, and I saw a bumblebee that came and landed on the rose just there. And as I was looking at it, I was kind of daydreaming at the time, and then I looked at it, I suddenly saw the pollen sacs on its legs, and these great big thick pollen, and Sam was bouncing around on the bed. I said, Sam, come and look. So he got up onto the windowsill, I helped him up, and I said, look, can you see those things there? He said, yes, you know. He said, what are they? Well, that's the pollen, that's where it picks up the pollen and it takes it back. And that was a part of looking carefully to really appreciate, you know, the reality that God's put there. Daffodils, going back to Wordsworth, wonderful daffodils. Part of my joy, or part of my hope, every January as it turns into February, is to look for the first daffodil that blossoms and comes out, because making a connection of reality. I know, well, maybe this isn't true in Scotland, but in the south it is anyway. When that comes, that the weather's going to start to get warmer and nicer, and you know, and I also know that my slight depression that I get every winter because of the darkness and the cold is starting to lift. It gives me hope. That's making a connection of reality, of God's reality. Just like the medievals, when they saw Sagittarius or something, they knew that was the time. Now we've got to sow our seed, or whatever it is. Now we've got to. They said that, you know, that's put there by a good God to help us know our farming. And I say those daffodils are put there by a good God to give me hope. You know, spring is coming, and I'm going to start to feel a little bit better. So that's part of it. So learn to look carefully, then learn to ask good questions. Learn to ask good questions. Jesus says, be like little children if you want to enter the kingdom of God. And I can tell you, having two of them, little children ask hundreds of questions every day, don't they? They ask lots and lots of questions. And we always say to our children, that is a good question. Let's think about it. Sam, one of my many jobs at Liberia is to trap moles that come on the lawn. Doesn't sound a very ecologically, politically correct job, is it? But anyway, the moles, that they chew up our lawn, and so I trap them. And Sam, like, he's very good at asking questions. He says to me, he says, Dad, what are you doing? I say, well, I'm putting out this trap. And he said, how does it work? You know, how do you know where you've put it? Well, I put a little flag or a pole up, and then he says, you know, does it kill the mole? Yes, you know, it does kill the mole. What, you know, why are you doing that? Why? And then he said, no. Then he asked me, he said, did God make the moles? I said, yes. They said, why are you killing the moles? But it was a question, you know, it was a wonderful question about realities, making all kinds of connections. And we need to encourage people in churches and in Christian groups to ask questions, to really ask questions. That's how we learn about things, isn't it? And make our churches and our Christian groups and Christian unions places where people are safe to ask questions. You know, there's so many places where people are afraid to ask, isn't it? You know, because they're frightened that then they'll get labelled, well, I'm not, you know, if I'm not, I don't quite believe this doctrine yet. But I shouldn't say that, because then people think everything's false about my faith, I'm not a proper Christian. But we can never learn about something unless we say, you know, well, I'm not quite sure I understand the providence of God and how it links with, you know, our choice-making capacity. And once you start asking, you know, you start discovering more of reality. There's a wonderful time in, I think it's in John chapter, is the woman at the well, John chapter 4? Yeah. And it's funny, because the woman at the well asked Jesus a lot of questions, and she learns a lot. And then it says, and then the disciples came along, and it says, and because the disciples were afraid to ask him a question. It's really interesting. They learnt very little. But the woman at the well was deeply blessed by asking questions. So we must learn to ask questions about reality. Pursue knowledge. Sometimes in order to learn more about reality, you have to get out the books and start reading and pursue knowledge. One of the things, I'm trying to learn a little bit about birds. I know nothing about birds. Some of you probably are very experienced bird watchers and listeners, and I know nothing. So I decided I wanted to learn. So I got out a book, you know, and I watch the birds that come to our back garden, and we put out some feed, and I look up in the book. I spent ages looking up one the other day. I was like, what is it? And I got to the page. It's a sparrow. Okay, all right. But at least now I know what a sparrow is. But that's how about, and bird song is fascinating, isn't it? I always think of, you will never hear a bird sing unless you stop to listen. Will you? You will never hear. And you will never hear the same bird sing on 2 consecutive days unless you stop once each day. But so many of us are going around our lives. We never stop to listen, to in a sense, pursue knowledge or to ask questions. So we never learn more about reality. And this is just what we can do with the Bible too. I think we can really, we stop at a Bible verse and we ask questions about it. We look carefully. It's amazing, isn't it, actually, when you start to look carefully at a Bible verse or a story that you think you know really well, how you actually discover that perhaps there was something in there that you didn't notice before, that you didn't really know, that you didn't really know very well. I noticed a Bible verse a few years ago, which has been one of my favourite Bible verses, John 21:12. It's one of those things. And Jesus said, some of you know it already, but Jesus said, "Come and have breakfast." Did anyone know that Jesus said that to his disciples? Come and have breakfast. They're kind of things like that we've overlooked. We don't look. And then I was thinking, wow, Jesus is inviting his disciples to have breakfast. That's quite amazing. After the resurrection, come and eat with me and share a meal. So we need to do this with the Bible too. We need to pursue knowledge. Get out the theology books. Get out the concordances and pursue knowledge. That's how we learn more. I was going to do it with this Bible passage, but I won't do it. But it's interesting. This is St. Gregory. He says about the Bible, Holy Writ, Holy Scripture, by the manner of its speech, transcends every science, because in one and the same sentence, while it describes a fact, it reveals a mystery. I like that. And it's actually, Aquinas quotes this as part of, Aquinas was asking the question in his Summa. He asked the question, does a Bible verse only have one meaning? And he says no, and then he quotes St. Gregory like this. Though it describes a fact, so it has a historical, and linguistic, in a sense, the facts of those and the facts of the history of the time. But also, in a sense, the meanings of a verse, as I said, there are lots of meanings, aren't they? And they deepen over time as we understand them better and as we make connections between other things. So pursue knowledge. Be humble enough to allow for revelation. We don't know everything. We need to be very humble when we come to reality. I didn't know that flag was a prisoner of war flag until someone revealed it to me. And as such, I think we need to realise that reality is a lot bigger than we are and what we know and our senses, and so we need to allow for things to be revealed to us, in that sense, both by other people and by our Lord. We need reality to be revealed to us. The last two things, be patient. Be patient. It's very important, isn't it, that it takes time to understand things and to see things clearly. And I'm like that with the scriptures. I think some people, when they read a scripture they don't understand, go into a complete tiz. Something I don't understand it, my whole faith is falling apart. It said this there, now it says this here. And I think, no, just chill out. Be patient. You can, it takes time to understand things and to understand reality. You can come back to it. And if there's a problem, predestination, free will, you have difficulty sorting it all out, well, do some thinking, do some inquiring, but don't let it become a kind of something that just, I can't believe because I can't sort this out. Many things we need to give time to and be patient with, and sometimes something else happens that helps you make the connection. Have you ever had that happen to you, where you don't understand something, then something else happens and you make the connections and you say, oh, now I can see, but that takes time. And lastly, pray and trust the goodness of the Lord. In Jesus, God came to lead us back into the fullness of reality. Jesus says, I've come to give you life in all its fullness. He is the source of reality. And so we need to pray and trust that the Lord would lead us deeper and deeper into His goodness, into the goodness of the world He's made and who we are and our role in life. It's a little bit like, I think, in a sense, as we move deeper into reality, I think we move deeper into God, don't we? He's the source of reality. And as we understand it and appreciate it and love it, we understand Him and appreciate Him and love Him more and more. So I'll finish by quoting C.S. Lewis again at the end of The Last Battle, where they are going into deeper and deeper into the new creation. And he says this, I've changed the words slightly. He says, a reality in which this life is only the cover and the title page, and in which each chapter is better than the one before. So it's a continually growing and deepening sense. And there's that phrase that comes in The Last Battle and in The Great Divorce about God's reality, where he says, come further in and further up all the time. That's what we're doing, growing.